Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Where Have Their Eyebrows Gone? My name is Roy Marks. I'm going to be your host today, and of course we are here, in fact, to talk about the upcoming January balance patch. I hope everybody is doing well. I'm going to be joined today by the Skills and Combat Balance Team Lead, Cal CMC Cohen. Cal, how you doing today?
Doing pretty good, Roy. It's good to have you back running the stream so that it can actually run smoothly for once.
Ooh, apparently I have mono audio.
Oh.
Sorry, you do the intro. I will fix that real quick.
Sure, I can do the intro. So obviously we're here to talk about some balance changes coming early next year. The year is almost over. It's a little bit crazy when you think about it. So I try not to. Hope everyone's done their holiday shopping, as I have not quite yet. But that is okay. We're here to talk about balance. Something to keep in mind is that the notes that you're seeing today were finalized basically early last week, week and a half ago. So there's no consideration for what happened with the recent update on last Tuesday. You know, we made some balance changes for the VOE Elite specs. And we're expecting that, you know, some additional changes for those may be coming in the January update as well, but those will not be included for this preview today. This is entirely going to be other changes that were, as I said, finalized before last week's patch went out. Something to keep in mind is that this update will be a little bit on the smaller side. You know, we are coming hot off the heels of the expansion launch and then the update to the balance update for all of the elite specs. But we have tried to include some interesting reworks for a lot of the professions. You know, maybe there's a smaller number of changes, but we're going to see a lot more trait adjustments or some touches to some weapons as well. We have some really exciting changes for sure. So the quantity might be a little bit lower, but we're hoping to make up for it with the quality or excitement value of some of the changes.
Well, I am very excited, and hopefully my audio is now coming through both sound channels, left and right. Chat, feel free to let me know if that is not correct. Yes, and of course we are also joined by Taylor Trigg Brooks, another skills and balance designer. Taylor, how are you doing today?
Hello, doing pretty good. Yeah, as Cal mentioned, we have a smaller update, but, you know, these changes should be, you know, more impactful than just number changes. A lot of them are like small reworks or adjustments to how things function. So excited to get into it.
Might have the spiciest single change in what time frame do you want to put on this, Taylor? Because I'm trying to think how far back we can go to the spiciest change in recent memory.
Recent memory, pretty easily say that. Maybe almost a decade. As far as how smooth
Wow,
it
that's
is.
ambitious. I don't think I remember every patch note for the last 10 years. So
Taylor's got a big brain.
Someone go look this up after the stream and see if Taylor is right.
Yeah. All right. But I think we can probably start getting into the patch notes itself. Feel free to keep mentioning the audio stuff. I have changed the settings around a little bit, so hopefully it'll sound a little bit better. I've boosted my volume a little bit, but feel free to let me know if it still is too quiet. But yes, we can get right into it. And yeah, here we go. So moving on to the actual notes, we're going to be starting off with a general note.
Yeah.
Oh.
I guess the last thing I've heard to say is, as always, we will be posting the preview notes after the stream. So if you miss something, that's totally fine. It'll be on the forums.
Yeah. And also, good to mention that we are only streaming on Twitch right now, but we will be uploading a VOD of this stream to YouTube in the future. Yes, as always, go check out the forums after the stream. We'll have notes posted there. Go give us feedback, yada, yada. We'll do that at the end of the stream as well. But yes, all right. Starting off here, we've got a little bit of a general note. This is obviously just a game-wide change, not specific to any class. Taylor, if you want to talk about this a little bit.
Yeah, so this is kind of like not really, most people don't even know this, but defiance damage when you deal to a breakbar enemy in PvE, if it's below 1 second of crowd control, it'll round up to 1 second. This was done a long time ago because of skills like Headshot on Thief before competitive splits existed, where it was important that they had a small CC duration but wanted them to be useful. But now in the game, you know, most things that we want to deal proper defiance damage are over this. So this is kind of a prelude to what we're going to be talking about when we get to Chronomancer. The biggest skill this affects is Time Sync, which is a half-second daze, which is rounded up to a second for all of them. So you get a lot more CC out of that skill than you should. So this is just a small change. We'll talk about it more when we get to Chronomancer. But yeah.
Cool. All right. And we are going to be going in mostly alphabetical order. We might have a couple swaps here or there, depending on certain things. But first off, first class we'll be starting with is Elementalist. And Kyle,
mostly alphabetical.
Yeah, mostly alphabetical. Kyle, please take it away.
So we have a few different things going on for LE. These are a couple of the core LE kind of mini reworks that we have going on. We'll also have some updates to Weaver and a fun little rework to the Catalyst, one of the Catalyst traits at the end here. But kicking things off, we see these are a few skills and traits that are a bit underused. We see Ether Renewal. We've reduced the cast time of this skill so many times over the years, and it's still not quite where we want it to be. And rather than reduce the cast time even more, we decided to put a little bit more value on top of the skill, because it's definitely something that you can cover with stability, or maybe cover with like an arcane shield. We want it to be more of that high risk, high reward type of skill. So now on top of the heal and the cleanse, you're also going to be getting some endurance back every pulse. It'll amount to about a full dodge, maybe a little bit less, because the number of pulses is not perfectly a divisible number into 50, but it will be a pretty good amount of endurance. So now if you do maybe play with Rock Solid or other stability sources, or have someone give you stability, or have Arcane Shield to cover your Ether Renewal, or you just find a good opportunity to get that channel off, it will be a pretty powerful skill. And we're hoping that this does see a little bit of play on maybe a couple builds here and there. Inscription, this is the glyph trait. It gives boons when you use a glyph, and it previously given resistance on every glyph, but we've seen a little bit of difficulty with actually utilizing this trait, because some of the glyphs have longer cast or longer cooldowns. They're not really conducive to those on skill type do something triggers. Some of the ones are shorter cooldown, but it's harder to utilize with some of the longer cooldown glyphs. So we've kind of split that functionality out. You'll still have the boon on glyph trigger, which is going to be based off your attunement. Then the resistance component of this trait is going to be coming when you swap to air. Notably, if you do have fresh air equipped, this will be a lower duration, basically how we handled one with air to prevent it from being too powerful, but this will give you a nice little 3 seconds of resistance as you enter air attunement if you play Inscription. So it does hopefully make it a more competitive option alongside the other air traits, and it gives you a little bit more of that resistance availability, as opposed to being super reliant on glyphs to get that. Then we have a nice little rework to Bountiful Power. This is a trait that is, it's a damage bonus, but it's a little on the less interesting side, and this is something that we try to avoid with Grandmaster traits these days. And as we look at traits to rework in Grandmaster traits especially, we want these to be definitely the most exciting traits in the trait line. We have Evasive Arcana in the same slot. We have the Arcane trait, which has got a nice little rework in the past year or so. I forget exactly when that change happened, but fun change for Arcane builds. So Bountiful Power, trying to get a little bit more flavor into this trait as well. It's still going to be a damage bonus, but it is going to function kind of like Kinetic Battery does on Engineer, where you're going to be building up these charges. The charges here will come from switching attunements, and then once you hit that 5 charge threshold, you'll get a burst of quickness and a burst of strike damage for a duration. So it gives you an opportunity to kind of set up your fire burst, set up your air burst, just a bit more of a controlled moment, and a lot more powerful in modes where you don't have super high boon uptime.
All right, very cool. Moving on, a lot of Weaver changes here.
Yeah, so these are 6 changes. These are the dual skills for Land Spear for Weaver. We've seen a lot of feedback around these since they got introduced in the game, where they are a bit more on the simplistic side, and we were really leaning on the idea of the mechanic that allows you to kind of bypass the Weaver cooldown by getting to your dual attune state a little bit faster, which theoretically played nicely with the spear mechanics, but those skills ended up being a little bit low impact, so we wanted to take a second look at those, and this is kind of that second look where now they're going to behave. They're still going to have that same functionality that they do right now, but on top of that, they're going to give you a buff, kind of like a single hit Venom, essentially, which is similar to kind of the other mechanics of the 3 skills, which will augment your next 3 skills, or your next spear skill. These will just affect your next strike of any kind, just to keep it a little bit simpler. But it will create essentially an AoE strike around the next target that you strike. And we see a number of different effects here, whether it's applying some conditions. Some of them will just be damage. The fire air one is going to be the highest damage, but it's not going to inflict any conditions. Water earth, we're going to see a little bit lower damage, but that's also going to heal you. We see a little bit of self Condi removal in here as well. So a nice little spread of different effects, but they all will have that kind of extra AoE strike as well, which notably will trigger the Weaver trait that cares about striking someone with a dual attack, which previously these skills could not trigger at all.
Cool.
So we're hoping that, this is... Spear is pretty much that AoE weapon already, so adding a little bit more AoE to that really fleshes out its identity and makes the Weaver kit a little bit more exciting for this weapon.
Indeed. And some Weaver changes continued on the next slide. But obviously, feel free to drink some water. Stay hydrated, everybody.
Yes, definitely hydrate. So a lot of these are a little bit more competitive focused. Weavers, something, especially like Condi Weaver is kind of the focus with these changes. It's something that we haven't seen a whole lot recently, and part of that is because it's just seen a lot of nerfs over the years because a lot of the ways that Condi Weaver especially deals its damage is a little bit unhealthy, kind of in the way that it happens. Primordial stance, just pulsing burning is a big, kind of a big problem. Obviously, you get a little bit of that from the lava skin as well. What we're trying to do here is put a little bit more oomph, a little bit more power into like specific moments, as opposed to like those pulsing effects that just feel like they happen and there's not really counterplay to them. So the big one is here with Pyro Vortex. It's going to be doing an extra amount of burning on that initial strike. So previously this was so reliant on landing a CC and then getting like the full value of all the ticks of the Pyro Vortex. There's still going to be value in locking someone in those extra ticks, but we see that a lot of the damage is being shuffled into the initial strike. So as long as you're landing that, or as long as you're dodging that on either side, that's going to be more of the moment of power of this skill. So we see something like that. Twin Strike has a big chunk of burning on it. Shearing Edge, we're kind of buffing up the damage a little bit there. Natural Frenzy, making it a little bit more accessible. These are kind of the main big moment, big damage skills that we're expecting and we're hoping are like kind of what allows Condi Weaver to do their damage. And again, becoming a little bit less reliant on stuff like Primordial Stance, which is not a mechanic that we're super happy with. Maybe it's something that we look at reworking in the future, but that's something that we'll think about a little bit further down the road. Also, Riptide, kind of getting a nice little 3 seconds off the recharge. We did this with the Earth skill as well. Earth and Vortex brought it back down from 18 to 15. Just a slight defensive addition to Weaver because we are hoping to see a little bit more of this, and we felt that 3 seconds, not going to make or break. We'll probably never see this skill at 12 seconds again, but we'll try it at 15 and see what happens.
So obviously with these changes being mostly competitive focused, the spear changes on the previous slide were of course game wide, but are we feeling that Weaver's kind of just not really in a good place in competitive modes right now, or are these changes kind of aimed to bring it into a certain role or strengthen a specific role in those modes?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, Condi Weaver is something that hasn't been like super relevant for a while, and it is kind of one of the most natural builds. Probably like one of the more original builds that came to play with Weaver as a profession, as an elite spec. Power Weaver of different flavors, especially Lightning Rod, is something that we have seen a little bit as well. But I think Condi Weaver is the one that probably needs a bit more help at the moment. So that's kind of where these changes are focused.
Very cool. All right, that is going to wrap up the Ellie slides for us for now.
That's not actually.
That is not going to wrap up the Ellie slides for us. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm actually just forgetting. I'm joking. It's a trick. We have one more.
We do have one last trait here.
Actually, the most exciting for Catalyst.
It's a fun little change. So Staunch Auras, this is a trait that obviously gave stability when you apply an aura to yourself. Very powerful in competitive modes. It's something that we've nerfed a lot in competitive modes. Just the critical mass of auras that are available to Ellie, but also just Catalyst especially, made it really difficult to find the right balance for this trait. You'd either have way too much stability or not enough stability based off the number. And just the raw quantity of stability sources that you always have to play around is really something that's really hard to get right. So as we're looking for fun, exciting reworks to do, we really want to do kind of a combo focused Grandmaster trait, because Catalyst very much is the most combo focused of the elite specs. We already have the trait that says gain an aura when you finish a combo. Obviously you have a combo field available pretty much all the time, so having the combo Grandmaster trait kind of felt very natural, and it also gave us a way to make this stability a little bit more controlled. So we do see that you still get stability here. The way this trait works is Whenever you finish a combo, you'll get a little bonus effect based off your attunement. This will be a once per 10-second interval, exactly how the aura trait works on the Grandmaster Minor. But so when you're in fire, you'll get extra might stacks. When you're in water, you'll get a little bit of healing. Air, you'll gain some endurance back. And earth, there's that stability again. So it's a little bit more of a controlled trigger. It's something that we can put a little bit more duration on and feel a little bit more confident that this isn't going to cause a ton of problems, but it will still give you access to that stability fairly regularly as long as you're able to combo well in Earth Attunement.
All right. Now that'll wrap up Ellie. And I may not be able to count, but I do know my ABCs, and so that does tell me that Engineer is going to be next. And with Engineer, we're going to have Taylor talk about that class. That's what we got going on here. Yep. Even though I think the first note is something that Cal is super excited about personally, but...
Yeah, for Engineer, we have some super small changes on this page, and then later we'll get into some trait reworks. I think we're talking about firearms, some specialization wide changes there, and then also touching some Grandmasters on alchemy and tools. But for these couple, the first are just kind of quality of life changes. Box of Nails, right now it immobilizes when you use it on someone that is crowd controlled. That wasn't really a great trigger we've seen, so we're putting it it's always going to immobilize no matter what. Removing the ammo because immobilize on ammo wouldn't be the best, but hopefully it skills a bit more usable. Pry bar, hitting some targets, so, better down cleave, use it in World v World, hit more people. Pry bar already hits pretty hard, so just hitting more targets with it seems pretty good. Net shot and overcharge slot, we're increasing their missile velocity, I believe, by about 20%. Sometimes these skills had trouble actually hitting their targets. They're pretty good when they do land, but when they don't, they're not, so hopefully they land a bit more. Those are the small changes, so we can go to the next page. These are going to be some firearm changes that we talked about. These are going to be a trait shuffle. We're merging some traits and moving some things so that in the end we're going to add 2 new Grandmasters. The first thing that's happening is Serrated Steel. This is the Grandmaster Minor that just increased your bleeding duration. It's being merged with the minor trait that caused you to bleed when you critically strike. So they're going to be one trait. And in that minor slot, we're moving Modified Ammunition there. Modified Ammunition was a Grandmaster trait that we feel like wasn't really worth being a Grandmaster. Deadly Arts on Thief has this as a passive already as their minor trait. And as a trait, it was good in PvE when you always have conditions on bosses, but in competitive game modes, it really had no value. So we're putting it there and lowering its value a bit so we can add some new Grandmaster traits. Equal and opposite reaction. This is a new trait that from the June patch that we added that we like what it does, but we feel like it maybe wasn't the correct place for it to be. So we're moving it down to the alchemy line so it can be optioned there, and we're deleting purity of purpose. We'll talk about that in just a second. But if you've been following the shuffle and the math, we have 2 new Grandmaster slots. So the first one is going to be Sharpshooter. It's basically going to be Bleeding Inferno. Inferno was another trait we added in the June patch for Elementalist, and it was, pretty interesting. A lot of build options opened up. So we're going to try that with Engineer. We felt like it was natural for the line to see what happens when bleeding skills off power on an Engineer have some, it synergizes with the new Serrated Steel, and then also you have other bleeding sources like shrapnel grenades, and explosive lines, the shrapnel trait there. And then the next Grandmaster is going to be Heavy Metal. This one's going to be more of your generic power DPS bonus. It's Executioner, but instead of just a flat bonus, it's going to give you both critical strike damage and critical strike chance. So the lower people are, the more crit chance, crit damage you'll have against them to create a more interesting damage profile for Engineer. Be able to get that crit chance that Firearms is really good at. So hopefully the goal from this line would be more options and more ways to play with it, because before it was a pretty static line where you just took the same traits and it didn't really change your playstyle, but we're hoping with the new Grandmasters that, be more interesting, more things to play around and think about when making a Firearms build.
All right. Indeed. Moving on to the next slide.
Yep, and these are going to be both the alchemy and tools change that I talked about. Backpack Regenerator. This trait was not very good, and then we also realized we don't want it to be good. It was pretty passive, so we're deleting it and creating a new trait called Blast Zone. It just creates a blast finisher when you use your healing toolbelt skill. Some healing toolbelt skills create a field automatically, so if it's a water field one, you're going to blast the water field automatically, but if not, you can blast might, blast stealth, what have you, when using that. So just some extra synergy there with things alchemy already wants to do. HGH. This trait is getting Fury in PvE only. Fury was sometimes a rough spot for engineer supports. Mechanist was able to cover it, but if you wanted to be like a scrap or an amalgam, it really wasn't something that was covered. So we're adding it there, so to open up some relic synergies potentially. And then, hold on one second. Gotta hydrate.
Oh yeah.
Going back, Purity of Purpose was being deleted for Equal and Opposite. Purity of Purpose was also a trait that was pretty not used in PvE, and then when it was used in competitive game modes, we just really didn't like the gameplay it had, so we decided to get rid of it. Equal and Opposite should be a more selfish trait for the alchemy trait line for people that want boons. It gives pretty good ones, so that's what's happening there. And then the last change is chain reactivity. The third successful trigger is now going to grant barrier to allies at a reduced rate. So this was a selfish trait to begin with, but now the third trigger is going to get some team support. We wanted this to be a go-to option if you wanted team support, now that Purity of Purpose is deleted, or you didn't need the Fury from HGH. So that's the purpose here. And then lastly, we go into some tools updates. Optimized activation. This is just quality of life for the trait. The Grandmaster Minor in the trait line gives you damage when you have vigor, so this is just giving you more vigor in PvE, so more uptime on that damage bonus by yourself. Kinetic Battery, this is a similar trigger to what Cal talked about in Bountiful Power and Elementalist. We're adding a damage strike bonus when this triggers. It already gives you super speed and quickness, pretty good. This is a trait that is very good on Hollowsmith because it procs when you go in and out of Hollowforge with your F5. And so I think something we're thinking about is splitting the effectiveness, like making it more effective if you're an Amalgam or a Scrapper, because they can't proc it as often. That's something we're still thinking about for now. Right now, this is going to be, I give you that strike damage increase. So in PvE, the tools line already has some good damage mods. So this can be another one to give to make it even more competitive. Something to take. Then lastly, adrenal implants. This is getting a bit of a rework. Right now, all it does is increase your endurance regen rate by 50%, which is super strong, but it's also kind of boring. So we're reducing it to 25%, but adding an additional effect that when you dodge, the recharge of your tool belt skills will be decreased, and that will create kind of a loop that you get where you dodge. You can use them. Optimized activation will give you more vigor, and then you can dodge a bit more, you know, that whole feeding into each other. So hopefully the gameplay of this trait is more interesting than what it is now.
Yeah. A lot of trait updates and shuffles around. Are we kind of expecting this, especially, from the previous slide, a lot of the DPS traits, are we expecting that to sort of increase a lot of the, damage that DPS engineer specs are doing? And if so, what are we planning on doing about that?
Yeah, I think right now we're not trying to increase the overall damage of engineer. We just want to make how it deals damage a bit more interesting. So with these, we're likely to decrease some of the numbers. I think with modified ammunition and PvE, it'll likely go down to accommodate for the new damage increases that those Grandmasters are giving. We know in Worldly World that, DPS NG is also super good. And so we're likely to make some downward adjustments on that end as well to make room for these new things.
Awesome. Very cool. Thank you, Taylor. All right, moving on to Guardian. We can have Cal talk about that.
All right, Guardian. So we're kicking things off here. There's obviously some changes to the Zeal trait line, and we'll see a couple more like quality of life improvements on the next slide. But the main focus of the update here is kind of this Zeal, a little bit of shuffle, a little bit of reworks here. Starting off with Zealot's Resolution, this is a trait that's just very difficult to actually utilize because it triggers when you are taking damage. When you fall below the health threshold and you are struck under that health threshold is when it creates the symbol. It's a little counterproductive to what you're actually trying to do as someone who's probably playing the Zeal trait line. You want to be that aggressive damage dealing Guardian spec. So that's going to trigger when you strike an enemy that's under that health threshold, and it's going to be that same 75%. So you get a little bit of damage onto your enemy, and then that's going to trigger that extra symbol, and that's going to be triggering some traits, doing some damage, just working the way that you probably want it to, and kind of the way that we want it to, is just be more, intuitive in how it works, but also just better to play with. Then we see kind of a similar Grandmaster to Grandmaster Minor shuffle that we saw with Modified Ammunition with Symbolic Avenger. This is a trait that, again, is pretty basic in what it does. It does have that symbol hook, but that is already kind of the core theming of the Zeal trait line, is that it has a lot of those symbol hooks. And so we thought it felt a lot more natural as the Grandmaster Miner, because it is a little bit more powerful than symbolic power as well. That is a trait that increases the damage of your symbols, which is good, but it is, a little bit less good overall, because it is just a very specific subset of skills that are maybe more difficult to land damage on in certain situations. So just having the more natural damage modifier in that slot, and it's still going to have that symbol hook, because it is as you strike enemies with your symbols, you get that damage buff, but that's going to be in your Grandmaster Miner right now. That opens the door for a new Grandmaster trait, of course. Furious Focus. This is a name that was used on a Master Tier trait, but it's getting a little bit of a rework here, shuffling into that Grandmaster slot. The way it's going to work, it does have a Fury theme, so keeping the Furious Focus made a lot of sense. Keeping that name made a lot of sense. The way it's going to work is that while you are under the effects of Fury, you are going to have increased outgoing strike damage and increased movement speed. It's not going to be a stacking movement speed. Fury is a little bit easier to gain access to. It's kind of inspired a little bit by Aggressive Onslaught over in the Warrior trait lines, where that is a trait that gives you move speed while you have quickness. That is obviously a stacking movement speed buff, because quickness is a little bit more difficult to have. This one's just going to be more like you have swiftness as long as you have Fury, essentially, but it won't stack with other movement speed increases. So it will be nice for Guardian, which is typically a little bit on the slower side, unless you have, say, a movement trait in the Dragon Hunter trait line. But as long as you have Fury now, you'll be moving faster, dealing more damage. And kind of the extra fun component of this trait is that when you activate Virtue Skill 1, you're going to create a lesser symbol of blades. So this is obviously the Fury symbol. That is going to do some damage, give you some Fury. That's going to give you the bonuses of this trait, of course. Do a little bit more damage. Trigger your symbol traits in this trait line. Should be pretty fun. There will be like a 10-second cooldown on that or something along those lines, just to make sure that it doesn't go too crazy in Worldview World with something like Renewed Justice. But you will be able to get a good chunk of Symbol of Blades. And then last up, we now have that open slot in the Master Tier trait line from Furious Focus moving. This is going to be a more defensive focus trait, Renewing Splendor. Now, whenever you create a light field or a combo in a light field, you will heal yourself. So this obviously has a lot of synergy with symbols that are all light fields. Some of you may recognize about half of this functionality used to be on the Greatsword trait in the trait line. It used to be when you combo in a light field, it would heal you. And that got removed when the Greatsword trait became just more raw damage focused. But we do like the idea of having that defensive option in Zeal. We've seen a lot of trait lines have success. A lot of the damage dealing trait lines have a lot of good success with more of that hybrid bruisery type of trait option that you can opt into. Obviously, you can still go full damage, but then you can also have the option to get a little bit more sustain, a little bit more defense. And so kind of the natural fit for the symbol trait line was that creating a light field, comboing in a light field would be a nice little trigger for that. So obviously you can create a symbol, maybe you create a wall of reflection. There's a lot of light fields that are not symbols. This will be anytime you create a light field or combo in a light field, you will get a little bit of healing. There will be a slight cooldown on whirl finishers, as we've done with a lot of similar traits, where you can only trigger that once every few seconds so that you don't get a massive heal every time you whirl, 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 whirl.
Nice. Would you call this more of kind of an update to maybe an outdated or slightly outdated specialization line, or are we making these changes in order to kind of fill kind of a role that Guardian might be lacking in some modes?
I think there's definitely a lot of traits in this line that felt a little bit outdated. Furious Focus was a good example of a trait that just isn't super valuable. I think maybe there's even some other traits that we are considering adjusting in Zeal that didn't quite we didn't quite have like the right plans for. So there might be some additional updates in the future, but it's definitely the case that some of the Zeal traits felt a little bit outdated. Something like Zealot's Resolution, where the usability is just very poor, or having that very straightforward strike damage multiplier on the Grandmaster trait without any additional hook. Those are things that we're typically going to be looking at to update going forward, I would say.
Cool. Awesome. All right, moving on. We've got another Guardian slide. Cal mentioned this a little bit with some slightly quality of life changes.
Yeah, so we just see obviously Virtue of Courage, Shield of Courage. These are both getting the stun break baseline. We've seen this was something that we tried with the Luminary Courage, where would just stun break for yourself, and you would not have to take Indomitable Courage to get that stun break component. And we've seen, I think this worked pretty well. We like the idea of reducing the reliance on the virtue straight line for, especially in competitive modes. That's such a important effect, and the stability is good, and the ally stun break is good. But for you yourself, the Guardian, especially a skill like Virtue of Courage, which the active is just grant Aegis AoE, so it's pretty mediocre. So much of its power level is assuming that you're playing the Virtue straight line. And it's still going to be very good with a Virtue straight line because Indomitable Courage is such a strong trait. But we're hoping that this maybe opens the door just a little bit, that you can get this stun break so you can get a little bit further away from virtues if you so choose, especially in competitive modes. Symbol of Energy, then this is a nice little quality of life usability improvement. The projectile didn't actually do anything other than create a symbol on the ground, so the question of whether it should be destroyed by projectile destruction, we've decided the answer is no. The strikes from the symbol will obviously still be blockable, but you will now be able to freely create your symbol of energy through the swarm of projectile destruction, commonly in Rule v World, but that does come up now and then in other game modes. So a nice little usability improvement, I would call it.
Absolutely. All right. Great. Thank you so much. That's going to wrap up Guardian Force, and we can move on to Mesmer with Taylor.
Yep. Mesmer, mostly for this patch, is going to focus around Chronomancer. Back when Troubadour was revealed and we talked about it, we talked about how Heal Chronomancer is a very strong build, probably too strong. And so we're taking some measures to reduce it. Large majority of them are focused around reducing its Defiance damage capabilities, as you'll see here. First thing is Signet of Humility. We're reducing the cooldown, but also the amount of Defiance damage it deals. Should hopefully be a good option for Mesmers wanting a Defiance damage in that slot, but not as effective on Chronomancers. When Chronos are able to use it, especially with Continuum Split, it is a lot of Defiance damage that eclipses almost every other profession. So we're toning it down there. Phantasmal Sharpshooter is also getting its ammo count reduced, which is less CC. Mental Collapse, less CC. And then Illusionary Inspiration is getting its outgoing healing modifier reduced. We just want the total healing of Chronomancer and basically all Mesmers in all game modes to go down just a little bit. Troubadour has its own outgoing healing modifier, so if you feel like it needs to go up itself, we can do that. But globally for Mesmer, we just want this bonus to be a bit smaller. Then we can go into the actual specific changes for Chronomancer. The first one is going to be Well of Precognition. We're increasing its cooldown from 30 seconds to 60 seconds, which is a very large change, but this is also a very strong skill, so we feel like it's warranted. It gives your team both stability and Aegis, so you can negate a lot of encounter mechanics in PvE with this skill, so we want to make sure that its use is well thought out when you choose to use it. Well of Senility and Gravity Well are also getting their CC durations reduced, so this should be a lot of crowd control reduction. Do want to point out that Chrono probably still has a ton of CC. C-Split is a very strong cooldown. You could use everything twice, so I wouldn't say that Chronomancers are going to be hurting for Defiance damage after this, just more in line with other classes. Gravity Well, specifically on competitive mode, should not change. We're reducing the knockdown duration everywhere, but there still shouldn't be a moment where people can dodge out of it. It will true combo into itself, just if people were reading that and worried. But we want to get into the trait changes now. There's only 3 changes, but these are pretty impactful. A lot of them are coming off the feedback from the June patch when we touched Danger Time and kind of readjusted some damage modifiers there. We wanted to make Danger Time a more appealing option, but there was resounding feedback that people didn't want to take Danger Time because it meant dropping Improved Alacrity. Improved Alacrity contributes a lot to the actual gameplay feel of Chronomancer, and we feel like if something is that gameplay changing and people like playing with that much, it shouldn't be an option. So we're putting it on a Grandmaster minor trait. Time Marches On is now going to increase the effectiveness of Alacrity on you. It's going to be 50%, just like Improved Alacrity now. In competitive modes, it'll be decreased a little bit because we're also removing the drawback of decreasing Alacrity on you. So it'll be about 33% in competitive modes. Basically now, no matter what you choose in your Master tier, you will always have Improved Alacrity. Danger Time is also being changed because we got feedback when we changed it that it encouraged too many specific team comps and stacking it. It was good based on the slow you could apply yourself, but when everyone else applying slow, it was hard to get it to a right number where it wouldn't be too strong or too weak. So we're changing it now so that when you apply slow to an enemy, it grants you a bonus, and it no longer relies on the enemy you hit having slow. The last change is that there's going to be there's a slot open now that improved alacrity no longer exists as a master tier trait. And we're going to be adding a new trait called Time Bomb. Time Bomb when you hit an enemy with time sync, you're going to attach like a time bomb to them, basically. It's going to tick down over time, and in 5 seconds it'll explode. While the enemy you hit has a time bomb on them, you are going to deal increased strike damage to them. And so it kind of creates a moment of time where you're going to hit someone with time sync, they're going to get this time bomb attached to them. You're going to want to fit a lot of your damage into it, into a natural burst window trait, and then they're going to explode, hitting them and all nearby enemies. So Time Bomb is now going to be kind of the burst DPS trait we envisioned, and Danger Time is going to take the role as a more sustained damage increase trait.
You mentioned the damage on Time Bomb when it explodes. It'll hit enemies around the person who's targeted with it. Is that damage dodgeable?
You can dodge the damage. If the person with the time bomb on them dodges, the damage will still go off. So people around them have to move away. The person with the time bomb should probably move out of their allies if they have it on them. Gotcha. But it is blockable, dodgeable. But you got to make sure you predict it coming, because a smart Necromancer can probably time. They know that a burst's about to happen on them, so the person will want to dodge, so they can use their other skills around that.
Makes sense. Very cool. All right, thank you, Taylor. Moving on, it is everyone's favorite green class, Necromancer, and Cal is going to start us off with this.
Yeah, so starting off, we have some spite traits. I guess there's a slight blood magic adjustment here, but this is because of some adjustments we're making to the spite trait line. So the first things first, we see Spiteful Renewal is moving to the blood magic trait line and being renamed, because it doesn't make sense for it to be named Spiteful something if it's no longer in the spite trait line. That'll replace Blood Bond. And this kind of started because we were thinking of, well, should Blood Bond actually be a spite trait? Because it is a signet trigger. We have the signet trait there. It has a little bit of that like life-stealing sustain. We want to get a little bit of that sustain into spite, similar to what we talked about with Zeal. It's like a lot of the best damage dealing trait lines do have that option to flex into a little bit more defense as well. And the answer was that it probably didn't make sense for Signet of Vampirism specifically to be in the spite trait line. So we've just ended up moving Spiteful Renewal, replacing Blood Bond. That trigger doesn't exist anymore. Malicious Swarm is the new trait in that trait spot that is going to cast Lesser Signet of the Locust, which is a little bit more thematic for spite. Signet of Spite is an option that we talked about as the spite trait line. There are a lot of questions around what is a lesser signet of spite anyway.
Locusts are notoriously known as the most spiteful of the insects. So.
Yes, exactly. But the question of should it apply all these conditions for just a shorter duration? Should it apply a subset of these conditions? It's probably still too many of the conditions that Signet of Spite applies. And we wanted to have some of that defensive replacement as well anyway. So Signet of the Locust made a lot of sense. It has that boon rip. It's only going to be one boon rip on the lesser version. But that will give you a little bit extra boon rip, which is something that Spite really likes to do. So we felt that Signet of the Locust was a good fit. So instead of Blood Bond being in the blood magic trait line, we will now see Malicious Swarm casting Lesser Signet of the Locust in the spite trait line. The healing will obviously be reduced as well, but it will be a nice little heal, some boon rip, heal based off enemy struck, heals based off boons removed. So it can be a pretty solid bonus of a little bit of healing off of your healing skill trigger as well. The next change is actually pretty big. Awaken the Pain moving to the Master Miner. Death's Embrace is a great example of an outdated trait where, this is a trait that increases your damage while you're down and also had a small vulnerability trigger against low health enemies. Pretty weak. Not something that you're really taking the spite trait line to get. You're taking it to get other things, and it turns out you have Death's Embrace, and you probably didn't even notice that you have Death's Embrace. So Awaken the Pain, spite is very much the might trait line. So having this super might augment be something that you always get is going to make a lot of sense. And we've removed the downside of that It's no longer going to reduce condition damage because there are situations where you are playing a Necro build that is a condition-focused build, but you are taking the Spite trait line because there are good things. Maybe you now want to get Lesser Signet of the Locust. Maybe you want to get Spiteful Fortitude now, get some extra vitality, extra life force. So we didn't want to, reduce the effectiveness of all conditions builds that play Spite. So you are just going to get the improved power on Might from Awaken the Pain and not get the reduced condition damage. It will still have that Might as you enter Shroud as well, so really good trait, but it is just core to the Spite trait line now. That's getting replaced with Spiteful Fortitude. This is, again, going to be a little bit more of that defensive-focused Spite trait, so you could see a vitality conversion, power to vitality conversion rather. So based off your power, you'll get some vitality, which gives you more health, which gives you more larger life force pool. Pretty good for Necro. Then you're also going to be getting a little bit of life force, 1% life force when you strike an enemy that's below 50% health with ICD. We've seen kind of the strength of this type of trigger in Reaper especially. Just getting that extra 1% life force every second if you are fulfilling that condition can add up over time, and it's a nice little sustain, a little nice extra fuel for Shroud for your survivability. So it felt like a nice little addition on top of the extra vitality. And kind of that striking low health enemies is also pretty thematic to Spite, so it felt like a really good thematic fit for the trait line as well. And the last change here, we have a small update to Dread. We wanted to make it feel just a little bit more powerful as a damage dealing trait. Obviously if we have Close to Death in the same spot, that is supposed to be more of that executioner style of trait. But Dread's actually a pretty fun trait. We see a lot of players that like playing with Dread, getting that quickness. The Fury is nice too, but of course the quickness is nice. Now it's going to give you a little bit of a very short burst of outgoing strike damage when you inflict fear, very similar to Danger Time. We did talk about, well, should this trait just say deal more damage to feared foes? And, that gameplay isn't necessarily as good. It incentivizes certain compositions to apply a bunch of different sources of fear. So now it's just going to be that same, basically the same reasoning that Taylor mentioned for Danger Time is why we're keeping this a little bit more contained, a little bit more of when you apply fear, you'll get a little burst of damage. So now that is going to be when you inflict fear, you're getting that quickness, getting that fury, getting that burst of damage, nice little bursty DPS trait. And then we've removed the cooldown component of that in exchange for the extra damage burst.
Very cool. You did mention, with at least one of these traits that you felt, maybe it was a bit outdated, and that's why we were making these changes or these swaps. But we do see Spite taken a lot, especially in a lot of World versus World builds. So are we kind of expecting these changes to just kind of change how those are playing? Are these buffs to those builds? Also, is the goal with these changes to maybe see Spite being played in other game modes as well as World versus World?
Yeah, I mean, definitely think that it has more potential, especially PvP or these extra defensive options, or these, maybe playing Malicious Swarm, playing Spiteful Fortitude. These are maybe a little bit more PvP slanted, where you want that extra self-survivability, where, you still have your support, but maybe you're hoping to be a little bit less reliant on your support than you are in World v. World because you're not always going to be with them. So just giving a little more of that, bruisery, a little bit of defense, but still a lot of offense type of Necro. Maybe we see it with Reaper. Maybe we see it with, maybe with Harbinger. Maybe some of the other elite specs as well. But Spite Reaper could be something. Taylor and I have been theory crafting the Spite Death Reaper for a long time now. You get Bitter Chill, which obviously you couldn't take Malicious Swarm, but taking Bitter Chill to fuel your Corruptor's Fervor to get all those extra Carapace stacks is an interesting concept. Maybe it ends up being real with these being able to take Spiteful Fortitude now and the little extra oomph from Dread as well.
All right. Very cool. But yes, moving on, we've got some Greatsword changes as well for Necro. These are big ones. Some
pretty big ones, especially the second note, but we'll talk about the first note because it is the 3 skill and not the 4 skill. Death Spiral. So this is kind of in a similar vein of thinking of, we want there to be a little more bruisery, a little bit of extra defense, a little bit more personal defense, personal sustain for the Necro themselves. And Greatsword is kind of that pretty slow, lumbering, weapon type that is generally pretty thematic to like that bruiser type playstyle. And so we obviously have the big damage coming out from Gravedigger. We already have some CC on there with Grasping Darkness. Death Spiral was very much like just a second damage skill, but we already have Gravedigger, so we felt that there was room to. We see the damage coming down a little bit in PvP World v World because we wanted to add a little bit more utility. We'll see a little bit more utility on Nightfall as well. But it's now going to life steal instead of giving life force. We'll see the life force back on Nightfall, but this is intended to be a little bit more of that. You know, you still get damage out of life stealing, but it's also going to be a little bit more survivability for you as the Necro. So really leaning into that more bruisery playstyle for a Greatsword. Reducing the aftercast a bit as well, because the aftercast on this skill is actually really long. And we've been trying to clean up a lot of these cases over. I mean, it's been a few years now where you'll go back and see a lot of aftercast reduction patch notes where, you know, there are some skills that have like half a second of aftercast just feel really clunky to use, for lack of a better word. So we'll go back and try to clean these up as we see them. With that out of the way, we can talk about Nightfall. This is kind of the biggest change that we'll see here. This is a skill that has been historically problematic, especially in World v World. The cooldown is significantly higher than it is in other game modes because it is that pulsing boon corrupt. So as we're looking at this greatsword weapon, you know, we want Nightfall to have a little bit of that defensive utility as well. You know, it does have the pulsing blind already, but we wanted to add a little bit more as we are. I guess the important thing is that we've moved a lot of that boon corrupt onto the initial strike. So it's not going to corrupt boons anymore, but you still have that big moment of the initial strike's going to do that boon corrupt. It's going to do that blind. The blind move, because we sped this skill up a lot, it's going to grow faster and it's going to pulse faster. We see that every 1 second instead of every 2 seconds. Part of that is because now it's going to be pulsing life force to you if you are standing inside of it. And we didn't want you to have to stand in that for 8 seconds to get the full value. Now it's only going to be like 4 seconds. Also get a little bit of protection while you are. Oh, that's actually going to happen on the initial cast as well. The idea is that you're kind of shrouded by the shadows, so a little bit of defense flavor in there as well. But this will, you know, give a lot more impact to the initial moment, kind of what we talked about with like Pyro Vortex on Weaver before, where we want to have those more discrete moments of things so that the counterplay feels a little bit more natural instead of having to run out of the Nightfall to avoid all of the pulses. Now you just need to avoid that initial strike to get out of that boon corrupt. Obviously, it's still going to be pulsing the damage and still going to be kind of an area of power for the Necro now, but it will have a bit better counterplay to that boon corruption and that blind. And last up, we have a fun little note here with Grasping Darkness. This is going to grant you quickness if you strike an enemy. This won't be per hit or anything like that, but if you strike a single enemy with Grasping Darkness, even if they don't get pulled because they have stability, it's just an on-hit trigger, you will get a burst of quickness. So that's obviously very fun with Gravedigger, which is kind of that intentionally slower casting time, that big sweeping strike, the big moment of big damage. Now it's a bit faster because we'll have a burst of quickness. You know, we'll be able to get a few skills off with this burst of quickness as well. So maybe you land Grasping Darkness, fire off your Nightfall, hit with Death Spiral, and hit with Gravedigger. And it's a pretty fun, you know, bursty moment for Greatsword players.
Nice. So if you're old like Cal, you might remember that back before Seekers of the Obscure, Greatsword was limited or locked just to Reaper. And then once, you know, we unlocked that for other classes, we saw a lot of other specs taking Greatsword, obviously a very strong weapon, especially, you know, for maybe some more support options, you know, even though this is, as you mentioned, kind of more intended maybe to be like a bruisery sort of weapon. You're still taking it on support just because of all the support functions. So are these changes kind of aimed to maybe separate that out of the support build a little bit, or potentially just, I mean, obviously, you know, you mentioned like usability improvements, especially in World versus World with the cooldown and Nightfall being so high. You know, was there a specific goal with this, or, you know, again, kind of just trying to touch up some outdated skills?
Really, the starting point was Nightfall. Well, I forgot to mention, because it's not on the slide, but we are reducing the recharge time back from in World v World from 40. It's down to like 25 now. The skill was just really, really problematic in World v World. And, you know, we kind of knew that we wanted to do some stuff with Greatsword already, but Nightfall was really the starting point of, okay, how can we make this, especially the boon corrupt, like we need to make this more controlled. We don't like this as an extra source of that pulsing boon corruption because it is so easy to flex into on support builds. And, you know, I won't really be surprised if those support builds are still playing Greatsword because you still have that boon corrupt and you still have like the pull on Grasping Darkness. But it was just so powerful that
Hmm.
it it wasn't really a choice. It felt, Greatsword was just the best option. And we nerfed the skill so much. We don't like nerfing the skill as much as we did, and we do it when it's necessary. But a lot of the time, we will try to look and see if there's like a rework somewhere down the line to allow us to, bring that cooldown back down. Um, and so that, like I said, that was kind of the starting point for the Greatsword changes.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, moving on from Necromancer. It's everyone's favorite green class, Ranger. And of course, our resident Ranger expert, Taylor, is going to talk about these changes.
Yeah, so on this slide, you'll notice that every single Ranger Greatsword skill is on here, and you're really like, oh my god, wow, this is so crazy. They're buffing everything. This is us rolling two-handed training bonuses baseline. So a lot of these are just the cooldown reduction and damage you would get from that trait. We're going to be talking about Beast Mastery today for Ranger, and some reworks to its straight line. So that would be the first part of it, is almost all of those bonuses are going baseline to the Greatsword. It was kind of a problem where a lot of Greatsword's power was in that trait, and so it felt unplayable almost, if you wanted to be like a marksmanship skirmishing ranger and use a Greatsword.
Makes sense. All right, and we can get into the Beastmaster changes.
Yeah, so Beast Mastery is a trait line that historically has been completely balanced around Soul Beast. It was really good if you were a Soul Beast because you get all the bonuses, but if you're not a Soul Beast and it's just buffing your pet, it was really bad. So we're going to try and adjust that so that's not the case. The first two changes, Pack Alpha and Loud Whistle, are getting increased, specifically when you're not a merged Soul Beast. So to be completely to when you have a pet out. These bonuses are a starting number, might need to go higher, but that's kind of the goal of this, is to make your pet actually matter. Two-handed training, we talked about that. The trait is still going to be get boons when you disable a foe. The Fury on disable is pretty strong and has great synergy with Remorseless and the marksmanship line, creating, when you CC someone, you're going to get Fury, which gives you that opening strike proc again. So that's a pretty good synergy that we want to make sure it stays there. But now that it's not buffing your grade, so we're going to add a bit of might on it. So it's going to be even stronger in that regard. Natural Healing is moving to the Adept tier to make room for another Master tier trait, and Potent Ally is being deleted. Honed Axes was the Grand Master trait. It is being moved to the Master tier because, similar to what we've been talking about, it wasn't really interesting for a Grand Master trait. All it did was reduce your axe cooldowns and give you some damage. We felt like reducing axe cooldowns and whatnot was appropriate for this compared to the Greatsword trait, because axe wasn't as needed to have these bonuses to be functional. But as it is moving down, we are nerfing it a little bit. This function that when you were merged as a Soul Beast, it double applied the base ferocity. This isn't really something that similar traits do, so we feel warranted in deleting it so that we could put a new Grandmaster trait that adds that damage back. As we talked about in Firearms before, the goal is to make these damage bonuses a bit more interesting, but not add damage on top of what you already have. Then we get to Resounding Timber. This was the one that gave you swiftness and regeneration when you use the command. It's going to be reworked to now when you use the command, you copy boons from yourself to your pet. And when you're a merged Soul Beast, it'll slightly extend the duration of boons on yourself instead. A problem Beast Mastery had was that, as with most things in PvE, having boons means you do more damage. So Beast Mastery wasn't even a better line than, say, Nature Magic, just because it copied boons to your pet. We wanted a more active way to play with it, and we felt like this was a good trigger. So when you use your heal, when you press Sick'em, Strength of the Pack, all your boons are going to be copied to your pet. So it's a way that you can upkeep boons on your pet while also having some of that management and feeling like you're interacting with them. And then we're going to have Go for the Throat. This is a new Grandmaster trait replacing Honed Axes. When you strike an enemy with a B skill, so your pet F2, you're going to cast Lesser Sick'em on them. So this is going to give a small damage increase to your pet. Lesser Sick'em is going to be about 25% for the pet. Soul Beast will be even lower, kind of how normal Sick'em is. There's not going to be a reveal, but this is a way to, again, be a more interactive damage bonus and try and get damage out of your pet from this trait line. And of course, Lesser Sick'em is a command, so it'll proc Resounding Timber. So you get a lot more of those boon copying. So you can stay on top of things and actually have those interactions that feel like you're playing with your pet to get them to do more damage. And lastly, we are reducing the cooldown of pet swapping a defeated pet from 60 seconds to 35 seconds in PvE and PvP. This was a change we did in World v World a couple patches ago, and we felt like a similar change was warranted in the other game modes. For today's ecosystem and pets, they die very easily, and we wanted to make sure that pets were still killable, but maybe the punishment was just a bit too harsh. So toning that down a bit, not as far as we did in World v World, but we'll see how that goes.
All right. You mentioned at the beginning of the slide that mostly Beast Mastery taken on Soul Beast. It's very strong there, but not so much on the other specs. So is this kind of just aimed to make Beast Mastery, an attractive option, just kind of for general gameplay on other specs, or is there a specific role or sort of build type that you're keeping in mind or that you were thinking about when you're going through these changes?
Yeah, we think Beast Mastery has fallen just a bit behind in almost all game modes. So seeing it pick back up in PvP would be nice. In PvE, seeing it be used on something like a potential option for an Untamed build. Untamed already buffs your pet a bit, so having that synergy there to make this a more appealing damage trait line than some of the others would definitely be interesting and kind of the goal of these changes.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you. All right. Next up is not Revenant, believe it or not, because some of us, not me, don't know how the alphabet works, but Thief is going to be next. And
Taylor just wanted to talk about Revenant, so we shuffled the order around.
It is his favorite spec.
We didn't want to have two segments, two professions in a row talked about by the same person.
Yeah, but here we go.
So we are talking about Thief here. I will be covering the Thief notes. Taylor will cover the Revenant, and then I'll bring it home with Warrior. First note here.
Ruined the whole stream. No suspense.
Spoiler: Warrior is coming sometime in these patch notes. First note here, I guess the preamble. Kind of the main focus for this update is really fleshing out some of the Antiquary support build. We've seen a lot of success with the Antiquary DPS build, the trait that gives you a bunch of artifact triggers for spending initiative. Very fun, very powerful, but the support build is maybe not quite where we want it to be, so we'll see a lot of notes here that are intended to really help that. But first off, the kind of keynote at the top here is that artifacts will now always use the same weapon strength. This is something that we've been fixing up on a few. Essentially, most profession mechanics have this problem where if they're not explicitly told to, they will use the weapon strength of whatever weapon you have equipped. So if you have, say, a rifle equipped, that will result in more damage than if you have a sword equipped, because that is how weapon strength works in our game, that weapons have different strengths. Two-handed weapons are generally higher. Rifle, of course, is even higher than the other two-handeds because, rifles just have the highest weapon strength. But we don't really like that behavior where the damage of the profession skill is inconsistent based off what weapon you have equipped. We want to make sure that those skills deal the amount of damage that we kind of intend to and the number that we balance them to use. So this is just fixing that up. People have seen this note on some skills in the past as well, and they might see some same note on some skills in the future if there are still some that we've missed. We'll actually see this note as we get into the Revenant section as well. But the general goal for profession skills that are not tied to a weapon is that they will always use the same weapon strength. So that is a very long-winded way of explaining what the first patch note is saying.
We're past the first note. All right.
Oh. Might need to take a water break.
Yeah.
But we do see some radius increases here on some of the artifacts. Exalted Hammer, Chalk Shield, these are getting some extra supportive tools. Like I said, we're really trying to flesh out that support Antiquary build. So Exalted Hammer going to be granting protection to nearby allies. Chalk Shield going to be giving barrier to nearby allies. The Hollow Dancer Decoy as well will be giving some boons here. Pulsing Might, and then giving Might and Fury on the explosion. Zephyrite Sun Crystal, this one is no longer going to be a stun break. I think we were a little bit unhappy with the kind of the level of variance that having a stun break on one of the artifacts introduced. But it will now blind enemies that it strikes and also remove conditions from nearby allies.
Very thematic.
Yes. And then here we see at the end kind of two updates, two traits to, again, flesh out that support build. We see Enterprising Aristocrat. This is going to be gaining the barrier when you use an artifact skill. also going to be having reduced strike and condition damage while you have barrier and you have this trait equipped. And the kind of fun addition to this build is that Possessive Hoarder is going to be sharing the now barrier that's attached to Enterprising Aristocrat instead, and the barrier that's also tagged to Magpie's defense, so the one that when you heal or use your elite skill, that barrier will be shared with your allies when you have this trait equipped. So it does kind of get an extra level of barrier support coming out from the Antiquary, in addition to sharing boons and getting a few extra boons here on the artifacts, and a little bit of all those extra defensive components. And these kind of traits that here at the bottom are really intended to solidify that support Antiquary build.
All right, awesome. Thank you, Cal, for taking Thief. And now moving on to the Lost Profession, Revenant. Taylor, you can take it away.
Yep. This slide, these are all underwater Trident skills. Trident has a mechanic where it inflicts or does different things based on your equip legend. The legendary entity stance ones are now updated to inflict slow and ethereal combos.
All right.
So we can go
very easy, very straightforward.
Slide. Yep. And the first change for release potential is the same thing Cal was talking about. Now its damage will be consistent, no matter if you have a great sword or a sword on. So yay. Now we get into trait changes.
You don't want to spend 10 minutes talking about that note?
I feel like Cal did a great job explaining it.
Thanks.
Now, these are trying to kind of bolster up support Conduit, as we talked about, Antiquary. Ventari is a core legend, so we want Ventari Conduit to potentially be something playable. Definitely don't want it to be forgotten. So, Boundless Knowledge, this was a trait that gave you boons to yourself when you reached the affinity threshold. It's now being reworked. It's going to grant boons to allies when you use a legendary entity stance, the Raza skills, to create more of a good synergy between Raza and Ventari when you have this trait equipped. Perpetual Wisdom, this was the trait that had your F3 be an upkeep skill. Is this getting completely reworked? It's no longer going to cause Cosmic Wisdom to activate indefinitely and be that upkeep skill. It's basically going to cause you to grant boons to nearby allies when Numinous Gift procs. It's going to keep the functionality where Numinous Gift will proc on Legend Swap. So this trait essentially says when you Legend Swap or use your F3, you're going to give boons to your nearby allies that'll enhance that support opportunity. Twin Moon Sweep, getting some small changes when Centaur stance is equipped. It's going to remove conditions from allies around you in the fragment instead of just yourself. This is so you can use that Twin Moon Sweep at range, and where the Raza image is, you'll also support allies over there instead of just around yourself. And then some small tweaks. Numinous Gift, the Grandmaster Minor, it's getting its boon swapped around. Instead of Quickness on Shiro and Fury on Raza, it's going to be swapped. So it's going to be Fury on Shiro and Quickness on Raza. Then lastly, a small change to Beguiling Haze, making it just a bit easier to land.
All right, very cool. Were we kind of feeling like support Conduit was maybe not where you wanted it to be, or are these kind of quality of life changes, or obviously a couple different sort of parts to this update?
Yeah, we felt like Raza itself just didn't have the tools to, branch into that support role. We feel like Ventari and even Jawless are pretty good for support as a baseline, but the secondary legend, you really want to have some additional tools for that to cover the gaps they might have, so this will do a better job in that.
Makes sense. Awesome, thank you. All right, and finally, we have made it to the Warrior slide, which we're very excited about. At least one of us is, certainly. And yeah, Cal, please.
I'm excited.
Cal is very excited, of course. CMC, as he's known.
I don't know if that's my warrior. Anyway, so starting off, we'll start off with Blade Trail. This is kind of the worst skill on the Greatsword kit. A little bit dated. You throw a projectile that cripples your enemy. As long as Rush is hitting, Rush is a good skill. Whirlwind, obviously a great skill. 100 Blades, pretty good skill, assuming you lock down your enemy and get that channel off. But Blade Trail, this is something that we felt could use a little bit of kind of a mini rework here. You're still going to be throwing out a great sword to strike your enemies. It's now just going to immobilize them instead of crippling. So this will be a very short duration immobilize. I believe it's just 1 second on each hit. So you can kind of get that double tap, assuming that the range is correct. It's going to cast a little bit faster. Again, a little bit of after-cast cleanup. Projectile is going to be much faster. Forget the exact number, but probably seen how slow the blade trail moves, and now it will move just a bit faster. Pretty powerful. Now you can throw blade trail, set up rush. You can throw blade trail, set up arcing slice. Maybe obviously won't set up a full 100 blades, but it will really open the door for a bit more.
It will move on the way
stuff.
back though. Well, that's right.
It will mobilize both outgoing and returning. So pretty strong skill. Next, we have kind of a hot topic. These are some staff adjustments. We've seen a lot of difficulty, I guess, balancing warrior around the existence of staff. We've seen just so much power in this kit of the staff weapon that's mostly intended to be a support weapon. So we obviously have a good amount of healing. We have that high mobility because we want it to be that front line, move to your allies and be able to support them. Those are thematically things that make sense on this weapon. Bullet Catcher being a channeled block has been a little bit problematic, especially in PvP, I would say, but overall it is just a significant, probably a significantly more powerful effect of a hard defensive cooldown that we want on this weapon that's intended to be a little bit more of a support-focused weapon. And we've nerfed a lot of warrior defensive mechanics, working, essentially balancing around staff, but we'd rather see staff as an option rather than a mandatory pick, especially in PvP. And it's still going to be good as a support weapon, but we don't like having that block, and we decided just to rip it out. Defiant Roar will still be there. It's not going to scale off number of blocks anymore. It's going to land somewhere in the middle, somewhere around as if you block 2 attacks will just be the baseline functionality. Still going to give that adrenaline, still going to do that healing, be that big healing moment. But we wanted to shift the identity a little bit further toward the support role and have less of that raw defensive strength that it currently has. Similarly, we see no more Aegis in competitive modes. We feel that's really important for PvE, as a lot of our support builds do have access to that, key moment of Aegis application, but it's just another instance of something that is a bit too powerful and competitive, and it's just something that we just don't want to see on this weapon anymore. So you're still going to have the high mobility. You have the leap on 2, the dash on 3, but a little bit less of that hard defense attached to the weapon. And we'll see a few defensive updates on future slides. We see balance stance here, getting the cooldown reduction back to what it used to be. We'd rather see kind of a wider range of options available to warriors and have them feel less attached to staff, and have us balancing essentially all their other mechanics around the existence of staff.
All right.
It's going to have that strong healing power that's a little bit easier to balance than something like a hard defensive channel block, which could end up getting the Nightfall treatment in Worldly World, where the cooldown just becomes so high that it's just unfun to use, and on top of how strong it is. So we felt that the right move here was just to remove the block. You obviously still have the CC. This weapon's still incredibly powerful. We're not too worried about the overall strength of the staff kit, and we felt that the block on top was just a little bit too much.
Yep.
So I'm hoping that Roy is not going to leak the next change like he did during our rehearsal. But have you seen the change that has gotten the most spicy change in the last decade, according to Taylor?
No, we haven't showed it yet. I thought you wanted to tell a story first.
Yeah, no, but you haven't seen it yet because it's the next change that we'll talk about that Roy should not reveal yet, because it is currently story time.
I know what I'm doing. Don't worry.
We're going to tell a story about a trait that existed a long time ago.
Viewers, skip ahead 5 minutes.
Yeah, probably about 5 minutes. Some of you have been playing the game a long time, may be familiar with the name Illusionary Persona. This is a trait
We're adding Illusionary Persona to Warrior.
Yes, perfect. This is a trait that used to exist in the Illusions trait line. It was kind of the iconic Grandmaster trait of the Mesmer profession, and what it said is that you yourself count toward your shatters. So this obviously allowed you to cast Distortion without any clones up, because you would count for a clone. You could cast Diversion with no clones up, because you would count as a clone. Slightly less relevant for Mind Wreck and Cryo Frustration, but it was still that kind of extra addition on top. And what happened with this trait was that it was just so fundamental to how the Mesmer profession played, especially in competitive modes, because you needed that distort availability. You needed that diversion availability, that every Mesmer build started with the illusion straight line. You took the illusion straight line because you needed illusionary persona. And the other traits in that trait line were fine. They're good, but the main reason you're there is because you need illusionary persona to actually play your profession in a way that feels cohesive and it feels good and it feels fun. And that trait doesn't exist anymore because a long time ago it got rolled in as baseline functionality to the profession. And none of us were actually on the team at the time. This long predates any of us even working at ArenaNet. But I can almost guarantee that the thinking at the time was that we don't want this reliance so heavily on a single trait line for a single trait that just makes the profession play the way that we want to, as developers. This is just how Mesmer should work. And so that got rolled in baseline, and that's a pretty big power spike for Mesmer at the time, because then you are no longer tied to the illusions trait line. You can feel free to still play illusions because there's still good traits there, but now you have so much more flexibility in how you build your profession. I think a lot of people may have figured out where I'm going with this, because we are on the warrior slide.
I still don't know what we're doing.
Go ahead, press the button, Roy. We can see that warrior profession will now always have a 5-second weapon swap cooldown. This is obviously a trait that exists in the discipline trait line called Fast Hands right now. It's going to do something slightly different. Now it's just going to give you swiftness when you swap weapons in combat, but you will no longer have to take discipline trait line to play with Fast Hands, because similarly to illusionary persona, this is a trait that is just so fundamental to how warriors play that we felt it is something that should be just core functionality of the profession. And the discipline trait line is still incredibly strong. You still have burst mastery there. You still have burst cooldown reduction, warriors sprint, brawler's recovery. Like, these are all traits that you still will consider. You still might want them for your warrior builds, but you are no longer completely tied to this trait line. Maybe you want to play strength defense with an elite specialization, and now you feel that you can, because you will still have that reduced weapon swap cooldown that is pretty iconic for warrior at this point. And it's similar to what I mentioned with illusionary persona. Like, this is probably a notable power spike for warrior, and we're going to be keeping a really close eye on it, and there might be other things that need to be brought down as a result, but this is the direction that we felt is correct for warrior as a profession, and so this is now just baseline functionality for warrior. I feel like I was going to say something else, but I forgot. Taylor, do you have anything to add about Fast Hands before we move on?
I think just general note is that Fast Hands is not the only example of a type of trait like this that we've talked about. And in the future, we will be reevaluating some other things in other classes. I think when we touched Guardian, putting the stun breaks on those F3s, that was a smaller example of this. So, it's in our mind of there are examples of this in the game where traits are just so build defining that they're, needed.
Yeah. Yep, that's good. Good call out. We do still have some other changes for warrior.
Yeah. Also, I don't know if you wanted to mention that obviously Fast Hands no longer being a trait is going to be replaced as a minor trait. Or there's a new functionality for it, I should say.
It now grants you swiftness when you swap weapons, which, obviously does play into the warrior sprint, which gives you bonus damage while you have swiftness and just a little bit more mobility if you choose not to play with warrior sprint.
Yeah. Notably, it's still called Fast Hands and not Fast Feet.
It is not called Fast Feet. That is correct.
Bit of a missed opportunity there, but all right. Very finally, confusing. We can move off of this slide and go to the next one.
Yep. So we have a few updates to elite specializations. These are all defensive focused. This is kind of coming back to what it felt like an eternity ago, where we were talking about staff and how it's supposed to exist alongside warrior defensive options. And so with the removal of that block, we were able to revisit a lot of defensive options for especially Berserker and Spellbreaker. We see Savage Instinct getting just a slight addition to that damage reduction. Quarter second obviously gets another extra quarter second if you have Eternal Champion equipped. Dead or Alive similarly getting a healing bump. Eternal Champion getting that stability duration increased just a little bit again. we feel a little bit more comfortable doing these changes with the adjustments that we made to staff. And similarly, we see Spellbreaker, Featherfoot Grace going to give you some protection on top of what it already does. Slow counter, not the most fun mechanic to slow and cripple enemies with your full counter. So now it's going to get the resistance component of Revenge counter is just going to be on that master tier trait now. And then Revenge counter getting a bit of a rework here to be more of that defensive focused Grandmaster trait. This is going to be called Resolute counter, and it's going to heal you and remove conditions from you when you trigger full counter.
All right. Great. And I believe that will wrap things up, actually, for our profession slides. Unless there's anything else that I'm forgetting, but I don't believe I am.
I don't believe so.
No. So, yeah, that's going to be it for the profession updates. As always, we did mention this at the beginning of the stream, but as always, the notes will be posted to the forums once the stream ends, just in a few minutes. I did mention as well, we plan to upload the VOD of this stream to YouTube. So if you're watching on YouTube, hello and welcome to the end of the VOD. Yes, thank you very much for tuning in as always. And as always, make sure you send us your feedback on the forums, on Reddit, anywhere else. And we will be keeping an eye out for that feedback. And yeah, anything else you guys would like to mention?
Yeah, so I'll just reiterate. I said this at the start of the stream, but that was a long time ago, so I'll say it again. This update was kind of finalized early last week before the update that went out on Tuesday even shipped. So we're still keeping an eye on the results of that patch, and there might be some additional adjustments made, on especially for the tuning of elite specs that maybe didn't quite land where we wanted them to as a result of that patch. But we are still kind of gathering the feedback from that patch, and we have a little bit of time to get some additional follow-ups to that patch in for January. Those will obviously not be previewed here because, like I said, the notes were finalized before the patch was even live, and none of us here are psychics, unfortunately.
Not yet. Well, all right, very cool. Taylor, any last words?
I think I just wanted to reiterate our thoughts on the bullet catcher change, because I think it is a pretty big shift. Staff had a lot of defensive tools in it. It had sustain, the active blocks, and mobility, and it kind of forced us to lower things around staff. We nerfed balance stance. We've been nerfing other warrior defensives for a while, all because staff exists and had these kind of soft power in it. And we felt like it became that if you didn't put a staff on your warrior build, you really felt it. And the adjustment here is we have to bring staff down, which on paper, it looks like, wow, we're nerfing warrior even more because that is nerfing their main defensive. But the goal here is that by making staff weaker, we can bring up all the other tools and make it so warrior as a whole is in a better position without having to rely on this staff weapon.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and I think I can add a little bit extra there too. We were kind of thinking about some other adjustments that we could make for warrior around like the adjustments to staff. But as soon as we decided we wanted to change fast hands and make the weapons drop cooldown baseline functionality, it started becoming like more of started to become more of an unknown quantity. And it's like, okay, our build's going to start playing strength and defense, and like now your build is just inherently more tanky because you are getting access to like both of those trait lines, or maybe even like the strength tactics build that's like might focus, and you have mending might on top of might makes right, and like there's an interesting sustain option. So there's a lot of questions that are going to come out of the weapon swap recharge time being baseline, and we didn't want to make a ton of sweeping changes on top of that as well. But as always, we'll be keeping like a very close eye on what's going on with warrior as the result of this patch. If staff needs to be a stronger weapon afterwards, that's totally a thing that can happen. It's not going to be getting a block back on it, but the healing numbers can increase. The movement skill cooldowns can come down. There's so many knobs that we have access to on that kit because it's just so much functionality in it on top of that block that was already there that is no longer there. But we feel pretty confident that staff can still have a place in the warrior weapon ecosystem. And, we obviously want that to still be the case. We just don't want it to be the weapon that every warrior build plays for similar reasons. We don't want to have builds that are or professions that are so tied to single build components. Um, we want that build flexibility. We want those identities to exist on different weapons, so there are different flavors of builds that play different weapons or play different trait lines. And finding the right balance so that all of those feel good and feel like real options is it's kind of the point of balance updates. We try to adjust things as we can every update such that the build diversity or the theorycraft options are increased.
All right. Very good. Thank you for those closing words, both of you. And yeah, we that'll be it then for us today. Thank you again for tuning in and watching. And as always, make sure to go to the forums, send us your feedback, check out the patch notes if you like. And until next time, we will see you in the mists. Bye-bye.